This episode is based on the case of Luca Magnotta. You want to hear something strange? Some people spend their entire lives trying to be noticed, not admired, not respected, just noticed. And the more I read about this case, the more it started feeling like a story about attention, and not the healthy kind, the kind that slowly becomes a need, then an obsession, then eventually something much darker. So, this story revolves around a man named Luca Magnotta. And before anybody knew his name, he apparently spent years trying to become somebody, a model, an actor, a reality TV personality, an internet celebrity, anything really. And from everything I've read, there seemed to be this constant effort to create a bigger, more interesting version of himself, a version people would pay attention to, one people would remember. And at first, none of that sounds particularly disturbing. A lot of people want recognition, and a lot of people want attention. But what makes this story feel psychologically strange is how much of his life seemed to revolve around image, not reality, image. The difference matters because eventually there comes a point where somebody stops asking, "Who am I?" and starts asking, "How do I want people to see me?" Those are very different questions. One thing that kept jumping out at me while reading about this case was how often Luca appeared to be constructing versions of himself. Different stories, different personas, different narratives, almost like he was constantly editing his own character. And honestly, I think that's what started making me feel a little uncomfortable because eventually it stopped feeling like self promotion, right? It started feeling like somebody becoming emotionally attached to this performance. And performances are a strange thing. Most people put on small performances every day at work, on social media, around family. But underneath all of that, there's still a stable sense of who they are. But with Luca, the more I read, the harder that line became to see. It felt like the performance itself was becoming the identity. And then things started getting darker, like much darker, because apparently attention itself no longer seemed enough. And eventually, that search for attention collided with something far more disturbing. In 2012, Luca Magnotta murdered a Chinese international student named Jun Lin in Montreal. What shocked people wasn't just the crime itself, it was the fact that parts of it appeared designed to attract attention. Investigators, journalists, and later documentaries would spend years trying to understand the role that image, notoriety, and public recognition may have played in the story. And honestly, that's where the whole thing started feeling less like a murder case and more like a psychological rabbit hole. Not because it's just shocking, because it feels empty, like somebody chasing significance without ever actually finding it. And the deeper I got into the case, the more one question kept coming back. What happens when somebody becomes more invested in being seen than being known? Because those aren't the same thing. Being known requires vulnerability. Being seen only requires visibility, and visibility can become addictive. Eventually, Luca committed this crime that attracted international attention, and it was the kind of attention he had apparently spent years chasing. And that's one of the most disturbing parts of this story is the possibility that somebody can become so consumed by image, recognition, attention, that the attention itself becomes more important than what they have to do to get it. That's what stayed with me. Not the headlines, not the documentaries, the emptiness. The feeling of somebody constantly creating versions of themselves because none of them ever seemed to feel like enough. There's something unsettling about realizing that a person can spend so much time building a character that eventually they stop living as a person. Because characters don't need authenticity. Characters don't need accountability. They only need an audience. And once somebody becomes emotionally dependent on that audience, reality can start becoming secondary. The more I sat with this story, the less I felt like it was a crime case, and the more it felt like a warning about identity, about what can happen when image becomes more important than substance, when attention becomes more important than connection, when being watched becomes more important than being understood. And I think that's what makes this story so disturbing. It's not just what Luca Magnotta did. That was disturbing. But the possibility that somebody can slowly transform themselves into a performance and just lose sight of where the performance ends and the real person begins. And I'm curious what you think. Do you think social media and internet culture make people more likely to build identities around attention and image?